A few weeks ago, a colleague asked if I had played the 2018 Spider-Man game for the PlayStation 4. He had picked it up and was enjoying it not just because it was a well-made game, which by all accounts it is, but because it was a rather effective facsimile of a place that he misses. Manhattan, still teeming with life. He extolled the virtues of being able to move through the streets again and just, see people walking around. Now, he doesn't live in the city, instead commuting in, meaning that his relationship to this place is a little bit different from mine. Seeing people walking around Manhattan in areas that I know and have walked by and through hundreds, if not thousands of times, makes me sad. And if you follow me on Letterboxd, you can see that I haven't watched any movies set here since lockdown began. Until a few days ago, when I finally made the plunge on my first $20 theatrical release on VOD, a film that I had been eyeing, but needed an extra push from someone chastising me on a live stream for not having watched yet. And fair enough. Now, I didn't know at the time that it was set largely in New York, and the fact that it was meant it hit hard on two levels. One intended, and one that its creators couldn't have imagined. Hello, by the way, and welcome to the Week Air Review. You can call me intensely pro-choice, and today I am talking about never, rarely, sometimes, always. I mean, anyone who has watched any video on this channel should not be surprised by that, and I imagine I would be preaching to the choir if I mentioned the fundamental hypocrisy of what George Carlin called the pro-birth movement, the people who want to force a woman to term but couldn't care less about what happens to her or her baby once it's born, or that Planned Parenthood's abortion services account for less than 5% of all of their health services, and in many areas they are the only GYN providers that accept Medicaid, making their continued function critical for women's health in general. Or that it doesn't fucking matter what I or anyone else thinks, and if someone doesn't want to have to give birth, especially in a country that has the highest rate of maternal mortality in the industrialized world, that's their prerogative, and absolutely no one else should have any say in it, period. Literally no exceptions. Any concerns I may have conceptually had over so-called late abortions, or those that take place after the 20th week of pregnancy, were eradicated by Martha Shane and Lana Wilson's 2013 documentary After Tiller. And I'm glad that most news stories about abortion, those not made with propaganda in mind, tend to be less concerned with philosophical issues around the practice than they are the practice itself, such is the case with never, rarely, sometimes, always. From the point that 17-year-old Autumn decides she wants to get an abortion, it is a foregone conclusion that she will get one. And it's not a big deal for her specifically. It makes sense that she doesn't want to talk to her parents about it, especially not her garbage father who, among other things, calls the family dog a slut without seeing or caring why people might take issue. And the conniving local clinician that lies about how far along she is in the pregnancy is clearly painted as the bad guy she is in this situation. We never have to watch Autumn agonize or lament the difficulty of the choice she has to make, something that surely does happen, but should not be treated as the foregone conclusion it so often has been on screen. Her cousin, Skylar, who goes with her, is 100% behind the entire time and becomes more than just an emotional support over their unexpectedly long stay. They have to go to New York because Pennsylvania, where they live, requires parental consent for abortion services. And as we've established, she's not going to get that. She checks Google for ways to induce a miscarriage, chugging vitamin C until it nearly makes her vomit, hitting herself in the stomach over and over again until it's black and blue, but to no avail. She has to get the procedure done for real. And so she and Skylar get on a bus and head off to Port Authority, a place where the film spends much of its runtime and mere steps from the theater where I most likely would have seen this movie had it not shut down mere days after the initial release. It is extraordinarily strange to watch this footage that is barely more than a year old yet already feels like a period piece. They ask a teller what train to take and are told the AC, and I think about my morning commute, during which I would switch to the AC at Columbus Circle every day until 2 months ago. Go to J, he says, and I think about the last time I was there on my way to the Brooklyn Alamo Drafthouse to see Parasite in black and white. And then I'm thinking about the Korean Build Your Bowl lunch spot that I saw on my way to that showing that I've been interested in since. And I wonder if it closed or if it will reopen. When Autumn must go to the Manhattan location of Planned Parenthood and we see the protesters lining the street, I remember how shortly after the election of our current president, I sent the company an email volunteering to be an escort for people in need of care at that facility, afraid of the people just across the way. Forced to stay overnight, they go to Chinatown, and I wonder if I've been to that bakery they order from, and I miss Chinatown. They go to Frames, a bowling spot that I have walked by the entrance to hundreds of times and yet never been inside, and I miss bowling. And all of this is wrapped up in a reminder that I wasn't supposed to be seeing this at home, at least not yet, that I should have been sitting in a movie theater, and I couldn't. And the reason I couldn't is the same reason that film production in general has halted, and we will feel the effects of that for years to come. These moments bring with them powerful memories that have absolutely nothing to do with the film itself. And they don't take away from its power. In a strange way, they heighten it. It gives me a way to think about the loss of control, even if the contexts are radically different. And on a purely ironic note, how many people defying government lockdowns cheer politicians who work to take away women's bodily autonomy? I'd bet actual money that there's more overlap in that Venn diagram than not. I don't know. That train of thought isn't fully formed, and an editor would definitely have cut it. But I don't have an editor. Welcome to YouTube, and back to the movie. The emotional centerpiece comes when Autumn is asked a series of questions by a counselor at Planned Parenthood. It's a health survey that must be completed before the procedure can begin. Many of the questions are prying, but they start off obvious enough. Medical history, sexual history. And while it's not surprising that this film doesn't render judgment on a 17-year-old for having had multiple partners in the past year, it's still good to see and something that stories need more of. But things get hard when it comes to her relationship history, the section that gives the film its name, as she must answer each question with never, rarely, sometimes, or always. Like multiple choice, but it's not a test. Has your partner refused to wear a condom, messed with your birth control, hit or otherwise physically abused you? Never, rarely, sometimes, always. As the questions become more personal, Autumn becomes visibly uncomfortable, unsure of why they're being asked in the first place, and having difficulty coming up with some of the answers. This entire scene takes place in close-up, as does much of the movie, and other than a brief cut between the easier and harder sections, it stays unbroken on actor Sidney Flanagan's face. It is not the first time writer-director Eliza Hittman has used this. A similar, albeit less lengthy or intense scene plays out in her feature debut, It Felt Like Love, but it's more effective here because there's no attempt to gloss it up. It is a distinctly non-cinematic moment, flat in both light and frame, and so there's nothing to do except take in Autumn's experience and sit there with her and her pain. And yeah, I shed a tear. This scene, I think, is what the Sundance Film Festival jury focused on when they gave Hittman a special award for neorealism, the first time for that particular accolade. Maybe it's the copy editor in me, but I've become slightly obsessed with the use of a hyphen in that award's title. The genre it harkens back to, Italy's neorealism of the 40s and 50s, isn't written like that. It's a single word. And sure, there are aesthetic similarities to those films. I was fascinated to learn that this was Flanagan's screen debut, as well as the feature debut of Talia Ryder, who plays Skylar. Looking at the cast credits for Hittman's films, you'll notice that many of the performers have few credits to their names, and often made big screen debuts in one of Hittman's films. The characters are typically working class, and the films are shot on location to really emphasize that. But Hittman's version of reality is different, and not just because the struggles of her characters don't particularly relate to Italy's in the post-World War II era. An interview she did with Criterion that's available as a special feature alongside It Felt Like Love, which is currently available on the Criterion channel, was illuminating here. Although focused on her older work, the interview was shot in 2020 and so reflects her then and now. She thinks of her films as being outtakes from more conventional teen narratives, showing the dark or humiliating moments that we all experience but never speak about. It made me think about Bo Burnham's 8th Grade, which does a similar thing, and in many ways feels like a less painful, more redemptive version of It Felt Like Love. But Burnham's dialogue is more realistic than Hittman's. Although her stories are about teenagers, the characters don't talk like them. She works hard to remove any dialogue that is not absolutely necessary to the story and will often shoot scenes twice, with and without dialogue. And if she can get away with doing the scene in silence, that's the way it will be done. And it often is. No one mentions social media or current events or pop culture of any kind. It's just not a part of the experience. And that may arguably make the film less relatable to the people who are the same age as the characters, but it creates a film that works more broadly. Plus, the choice to shoot Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always on 16mm film gives the whole thing a kind of timelessness. You can see what kind of phones the kids have, and that lets you date it to within a few years, but all of that is de-emphasized. And so, assuming the world ever returns to some semblance of normalcy, and we see a Times Square that looks like that again, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is going to continue to feel exactly as timely until something fundamental in this country changes, meaning forever. 2 minutes after the credits rolled, I gave Planned Parenthood $200. While the film is hardly an advertisement for the organization, I'm not sure that their name is ever said aloud and you only see the logo a few times, their presence and importance are clearly felt. And while I am stuck here, unable to do much of anything, it seemed like literally the least I could do, especially since it effectively came from my stimulus check. I've donated much of the money that came signed with the name of a serial predator to organizations that I'm sure he would hate. So this seemed like an appropriate use of the funds. It would be nice if that wasn't something I felt I needed to do, if the government just cared about women's health more. But I guess that's too much to ask. 8.9 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you particularly to my patrons, my mom, Hamrain Marco, Kat Saracata, Benjamin Schiff, Anthony Cole, @BlasianFMA, Magnolia Denton, and Elliot Fowler. If you like this video, that's great. If not, I'm sorry. And if you'd like to see more, please subscribe. I hope to see you next week.